Us celebrate this 5-year retrospective of F.A.T Lab. Since the beginning of Eyebeam, this whole organization has had a focus on breaking technology open, cracking things, looking at the innards, sharing those with the public, and letting people and the culture at large actually make decisions about how they want to use the technology, whether they want to embrace it, deflect it, or hack it. And so F.A.T Lab really embodies that spirit and embodies that ethos, which has been part of Eyebeam since the beginning. And it's an amazing thrill to have them back in the house and to have them showing this work. I want to say a big thank you to Lindsay Howard for somehow, for somehow herding the proverbial cats and getting these people to talk together, and then even more amazingly than talking to each other, but to have them show up in the same place at the same time. It's a really, really, really special moment, and it's our pleasure to have them here. It's also our great pleasure to have Christiane Paul join us this evening as the moderator of the panel. As a curator at Whitney and as a theorist and writer, she brings a very unique and strong perspective to the work of F.A.T Lab and the media art field as a whole. And I think I'm just going to leave it at that and go ahead and turn it over to her as moderator of tonight's panel. And then I think everyone will come on stage. And I invite you all to join in the Q&A at the end as well. This organization is about nothing if not open sharing and critical feedback. So please feel free to participate throughout the panel. So thank you again for coming.
Okay, thanks again for coming, and thanks for inviting me to moderate this panel. So as you all know, I assume all of the artists who are here tonight, presenting tonight, are part of F.A.T Lab, so I'm not going to point that out in each and every one of their bios. And we're going to start with everyone presenting for about 10 minutes, and then we'll have a discussion amongst ourselves and with you. And the order in which people are going to present will be Evan Roth, then Aram Bartholl, Addie Wagenknecht, Tobias Leingruber, and James Powderly. And I will introduce each and every one of them very briefly before their talk. In general, I want to say a few things about the issues we're going to discuss here. The panel is about hackers as artists or artists as hackers, and I think we need to discuss a little bit more where the boundaries lie between them. If we think about the popular definition about hacking, it usually means to most people, I guess, still using computing skills, programming skills to maliciously intervene into systems, hack into systems. While I think all of the participants in the panel tonight understand hacking as something more of a cultural act and as a form of misuse, as a form of breaking or intervening into systems, and they will also all talk about their specific understandings of hacking. So what we're getting at tonight is a more cultural understanding of hacking, and we will also discuss how the act of hacking intersects with artistic practice and what it means to the art world or understanding systems of the art world. So thanks again, and I'll invite Evan up on stage. So Evan Roth is one of the co-founders of the F.A.T Lab. He is an American artist, but based in Paris. And Evan's work is in the permanent collection of the Museum of Modern Art and has exhibited widely at institutions including the Centre Pompidou, the Kunsthalle Vienna, the Tate, the Fondation Cartier, and YouTube. In 2012, Evan was awarded the very prestigious Smithsonian Cooper Hewitt National Design Award. And again, he's one of the co-founders of F.A.T Lab, and also together with James Powderly of the Graffiti Lab.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks everybody for coming. It's been a really fun week to be back with everybody from F.A.T Lab back here at Eyebeam, kind of where all of this generated. I'm sure we'll talk about it, a bit about that tonight. I thought I'd start by just talking a little about my own practice, which is an art practice that's very much connected to this idea of hacking, this idea of misuse. I have kind of three places that my work shows up primarily. Some is in more kind of traditional art modes of galleries with white walls, and it exists in more traditional mediums like prints and sculptures. I have another strain of work that shows up on the internet, work that's meant to be natively viewed within the browser. This is from a series that's up at the Museum of Moving Image at the moment called Tribute to Heather. And then I have a third part of my work that has to do with making art in public space, has to do with making hacks in public space. Sometimes that means tool making, a lot of that work I did with Mr. Powderly here in the form of the Graffiti Research Lab, but it's hacking at an urban scale, thinking about how to make tools for people that are making work outside. This is from a series called Propulsion Paintings. So they look very different, right? They're in different formats, they're in different venues, they oftentimes have different audiences, and it looks like a very kind of overly diverse body of work perhaps, but I see it as all being connected through this idea of hack, the hack which we're going to be talking about today. And so in thinking about kind of hacker culture and what all this means and where it comes from, a lot of it for me is connected with open source and with people that came from the free software movement, and it was that community of people that really formed the definition of the hack as I like to think about it. This is Linus Torvald, the creator of Linux. His autobiography is called Doing It for Fun, which I really like because I think this idea of fun, right? This idea that this community of open source hackers, they have a sort of a different reason for the reason, they have a different mode for making the work that they're doing, right? It's not driven by profit, they're a kind of gift-giving culture, right? So they're, this idea of fun, this idea of play, I think is at a big part of a lot of the work that's in this exhibition, a lot of the work that I think the F.A.T Lab members are making. And in kind of researching different people's definitions of the word hacker, this phrase kept coming up a lot of playful cleverness, which is one that I really like, and it's one that like I see in a lot of the work of my peers in the room. This is a piece by a Dutch artist named Helmut Smits. And so this idea of play shows up in my work also. This is a series called Multi-Touch Paintings. This one is called Angry Birds Level 1-1. So I guess that laughter means you get it. So this is, they're made very simply. I think a lot of the best hacks are very simple. And so this is just putting pieces of tracing paper over these smartphones that we all have in our pockets, and it's about kind of archiving these first sort of awkward moments where we're all touching computers for the first time. And so it has to do with identity, but it also has to do with how interface designers are sort of teaching us as human beings to make these gestures that we've sort of never made ever before, and now we're doing this 100 times a day. So this one's called Username and Password. This is an active account if anybody wants to try. So I was doing that as an individual piece where you can kind of see how these gestures are working, and for me it was a lot about archiving. This is kind of a series where I was playing Angry Birds from start to finish, right? So this is looking at this as a bigger data set. So these are all the winning levels, but more recently I did a version that was every single attempted level. So this is an installation that's up at the University of Maryland right now, and this is every level of Angry Birds. And so for me, this is a solo exhibition called Casual Computing. And so for me, this idea is like, as we're entering into this new relationship with computers where we're sort of stealing away seconds on the metro, and it's not necessarily about sitting in front of the desk and working for 10 hours, but all these little moments, they add up. And so this is kind of a visualization of that. I'm very influenced by graffiti, but I think I love graffiti because they're hackers, right? Like Mike and Ski were talking up here earlier. When I hear them talking about the work that they're making, like I hear hackers talking about the work that they're making. It's the same design approach, and I think my love affair with graffiti is really because they're hackers, not painters, right? And so my favorite tags is about where they show up and not necessarily what color they're in or how beautifully they're rendered. So even when I'm looking at something like this, it's not about the letters, it's about the system it's hacking, right? It's like graffiti writers, they're hacking the subway system. And so graffiti is a community of hackers. And I think when James and I were collaborating on the work for Graffiti Research Lab with Theo and a lot of other people, projects like laser tag, these were hacks at kind of an urban scale, and thinking about making tools that would sort of allow other people to experience this hack, right? This moment of empowerment. And so this idea of unintended use, right? Using lasers to write graffiti, duct taping knives onto vacuum cleaners, right? Like this idea of unintended use, I think, is a lens which hackers tend to look at the world around them and turn boring technologies into really exciting ones. This is from an internet meme called the Doomba. And so there's a lot of thinking that comes from the early hacker scenes that grew up with Linux. This is a phrase from Eric Raymond, but he's talking about Linus Torvalds again. He says his genius was being lazy like the fox, right? And it's kind of about trying to find the quickest way between points A and point B. And so whenever I'm spending too long on a project, I always kind of come back to this lazy like a fox mentality and try to treat things the way hackers would treat them. This is a particularly lazy piece that I did called How to Keep Motherfuckers from Putting Their Seats Back. It's a very short performance piece that happens on an airplane. It's a single zip tie. And so I'm much more fascinated in the philosophies that come from hacker communities rather than the technologies, right? Because to me, like a zip tie can be a really empowering, interesting technology. I don't know, do I have volume up here? Oh, I do. Okay, I'll just show a couple quick ones and then I'll pass the mic. This is a more recent piece called Free Speech. This was in Vienna about 6 months ago. Also a very simple construct. It's just a van with a large mobile telephone number, the word free, and then an arrow pointing to this loudspeaker on the roof. And there's no instructions, there's no input, there's no voice on the other line, but when you would call in and you'd kind of sheepishly say hello, you'd hear your own name kind of ringing out throughout the immediate proximity. So I'll show just 30 seconds of what this looks like.
Hallo. Oh geil. Fick dich. Fick dich. Abonniert das auch
Hallo?
Nice! Geil! So fresh, man!
And so this piece was kind of about introducing this moment of empowerment into a kind of unexpected situations, right? I think like when James and I were doing a lot of laser tag events, that we had that feeling too. It was like you're allowing people to say something on a scale that kind of weren't ever meant to have control over. And so that idea of sort of hacks as empowerment is what I really am interested in. That's kind of the piece I did over here with the TED sign is kind of about that. It's like a sculpture you can stand in front of and receive power. And for like there's been a crew of Fat Lab members driving around the Google car over there, and if you've ever been behind the wheel of the Google car, you know what power feels like. It's like these hacks, they lead to empowerment. So you can feel free to give your own TED presentations over here. And that's really the core of my interest in hacking. It's not about the technology. It's more about this, how something as simple as a zip tie or like some painted red wood letters can sort of give people this moment of empowerment. And so I'll leave with this image. This is one I keep coming back to. Is like one of my favorite just art hacks of all time. This is a piece by William Lamson. And it kind of has everything for me, right? It's playful, it's clever, anti-authoritarian, it's misuse, it's lazy, it's empowering, and it's just a balloon and a string and a piece of rock, right? So to me, this is like the perfect hack. You know, it's the minimum amount of effort for the maximum amount of impact. Okay, so with there, I want to pass the mic. Who do we have coming up next? Mr. Bartholl, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Aram Bartholl.
It's like the slides are.
So thanks a lot, Evan, and please welcome Aram Bartholl. Aram lives and works in Berlin. His work deals with net politics, DIY movements, and internet development in general. His work has been exhibited at MoMA here in New York, at Pace Gallery, and at DAM, the Digital Art Museum in Berlin. So please welcome Aram.
Yeah, thank you. I'm gonna talk about Speed Projects, which is a label and sort of a certificate I came up with in 2009 as a, beginning of 2009 it became part of F.A.T Lab, and it was a really good experience to, the way of working, how F.A.T Lab works and how people work in there was really a rich new whole field, and also changed me a lot how I work myself. And Evan already pointed out a lot of very important qualities of a hack, and one of those is like to doing things which are very effective in a very short time period. And the Speed project is sort of, it's just the stamp, but it's about, the idea is make a project in a very short time frame. Maximum is 1 day, so everything which is longer than 1 day is not a Speed project anymore. And you can see it here, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. It's often been used for internet projects, but could be applied to any other project. And of course, I mean, it's a certificate, but it's not really, well, you give the certificate yourself, sort of self-approved. And it's about time, and it's about how much time do I need to make an art work. And there's an art, I just chose this now because like it's very obvious, but I mean, there's art pieces out there, and a lot of art is a lot of time consuming, and it gains value by, oh my God, can you see this? How much time it has taken to make this. And of course, this is legit, like, right? I mean, in painting or in many art forms. But at the same time, and this is something I learned a lot with F.A.T and looking at GRL and also at the hacker community, to do something very fast and conceptual. This is also like one of the great hacks in art history. So there's many examples, and so I just chose 2 here to kind of put out the idea. And there's also like a real stamp, but this is all like a series of projects which have been done by F.A.T Lab members. So here's even like 10 seconds, something, I think Evan did this. Where was it? Barcelona, right? So there's a spray can, go nuts, and then people go nuts. URL performance art, this is also by Evan. And it's really like the way to work with the web or for the internet. You make a project, maybe it's also very reacting to something what just happened, like the meteor comes down and then there's like memes going on, etc. So it's very much like how the web's, kind of the drive of the web. And to see projects compared to how much time that it took to make them is very important, right? So, or at least it's like, gives you an idea, oh, this was made in 1 hour. And this is like a video interface Jamie made. So you type in a sentence and then you get all the videos with these topics. The auto smiley by Theo was made in 1 hour, which is like a chat interface. So you it's a face recognition, and when you smile, your chat adds a smiley. So there's all these projects, and I think Speed project and being fast and making these things is a very important part of the hacking culture. And this talk was made in 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much. Our next presenter is Addie Wagenknecht. Addie is an interdisciplinary experimental researcher who works in the fields of emerging media and open source, pop culture, and hacktivist arts. Each of her pieces is always a clever conceit with a narrative that becomes a commentary on aspiration and failure. She currently is the MIT Open Hardware Summit Chair. She's a fellow at Eyebeam and Mozilla, and a contributor to Artifact of Code. So please welcome Addie Wagenknecht.
So hey everyone, I just want to give you a quick overview of my work and a little history beforehand. So my fascination with computers really started when I was a kid with the Oregon Trail game. This was 1985 for those of you who remember. from there, I really dove into something called KidPix. And this is really the point in my work where I first remember the idea that you could experiment with computers, and it wasn't just this read-only environment, but you could do something beyond just what was on the screen. So as a kid, I started experimenting with KidPix, and I became very interested in this idea of creating art with computers. In high school was a time of my life when the internet became a reality. So I got my dial-up modem and my computer, and at some point in high school, I have a memory of my dad disconnecting my modem so that I would go out on a date. So I want to talk a little bit about my creative process and kind of what I consider a hack versus art. When you Google hack, you get a lot of skulls, matrixy code, and kind of this idea of like a guy in a black hoodie with a skull shirt on, which is cool, but it's not really how I identify with myself. And when I look into art, it's kind of this Bob Ross thing. My reference for art was Bob Ross. Like growing up, I'd watch PBS with my grandma. Shout out to grandma if you're here. So I didn't have a lot to go from. And I've always been into kind of this idea of doing things all at once. But I think the interesting thing about hacking is, like art, there's not really a wrong hack. So right now I'm thinking a lot about what is hacking. I define hacking as it's something that's not necessarily about dismantling, but the realization that whatever it is you're wanting to dismantle has already been dismantled. So right now I'm thinking about hacking as political hacks, as life hacks, art hacks, social hacks. We're in a time in society where with Occupy and Anonymous, that hacking isn't just this niche thing. So we've gone from 10% or 5% to the 99%. And we're at a point where our grandparents and our parents and mainstream media is starting to recognize hacking as really a mainstream accepted movement. I don't feel like it's a niche anymore. So it's a very interesting time to be considered a hacker. Sorry, I'll go back really quick. So this is really, this work specifically is in the show right now. It's Webcam Venus. This is really what I consider kind of a social hack, and this idea of morphing and playing with community. So with this project, unfortunately I don't have a video, but it's right there if you want to see it. The idea with this project is that we went on to campsites and we played with getting people to pose like iconic works of art. I'm also really interested in kind of the female aspect of hacking, or what would you do as a female? So I've been playing with like nipple blocking algorithms. And also on the FAT list, we had a discussion about why is there a lack of women in open source, and what is this lack of women in hardware? And and even hacking for that matter. So I don't think it's necessarily, again, the green matrix code and the skulls. But I started thinking about that process, and I was interested in kind of playing with that. So I took Pirate Bay, and I thought, what would Pirate Bay look like if it had been developed by high school girls? I turned it pink. I got some like sparkly text. I renamed it Princess Bay. I switched out all the ads with David Beckham instead of porn, and the spring wardrobe sale from Refinery 29. I'm also playing a lot with hardware hacking. So one of the projects here is Wi-Fi Tagger. It's basically a router that allows you to put 4 lines of 32 characters each. So the idea is really tagging space. It's taking this idea of hacking and art out of the gallery and even one step further off the internet, and the idea that you can create and enable yourselves to change something. It's really about this idea of empowerment of not only yourself, but of the hardware, so that you're not scared to break it. You can open it up and play it and kind of make it your own. This is another tech hack. It's called optimization of parenthood. So the idea is that it's a robot arm that actually reacts to a baby crying. I think there's quite a monotony around parenthood. And I think a lot of the repetitive tasks are very robotic in nature. So I wanted to play with that idea and create kind of a robotic babysitter. Shout out to the parent over there. And finally, my last kind of tech hack that I'm working on is LaserSaw. It's an open source laser cutter that I've been developing the last few years with Stefan Heschenberger. We have about 1,000 of them in the wild right now, everywhere from Carnegie Mellon to New York University to hackerspaces. And it's really this idea of empowering people and allowing people to have access to equipment and materials that they wouldn't necessarily have access to or be able to afford without doing it themselves. It's not a commercial or anti-commercial movement. It's really, I think, what embodies open source is this idea of increasing accessibility and proliferation of a machine or something that you're passionate about. This project I find kind of interesting because it overlaps a lot with what GRL was doing when I first was introduced to it. It's kind of this urban poetry project I started doing when I was at ITP for my master's in 2006, 2007. So I went around New York and I took pictures of a lot of advertising, loaded them to Flickr, used the Flickr API, and actually used like a laser pointer to let you tag and create haikus using the words pulled out of ads, and kind of playing with this idea of ubiquity of advertising, and again allowing you to embrace it and like change it yourself. So that kind of concludes my quick artist overview. I'll pass the mic off.